I wanted to talk to you tonight was about the diversity of the sector and to show you a little bit about how diverse the sector actually is. So can I get a bit of a sense of the room of who currently works in the public sector? Okay, great. So that just helps me know which bits to emphasise and what to cover and what not to labour as well. So you may be aware that in the New South Wales public sector we employ about 11% of the total New South Wales workforce, which is a pretty considerable, and it actually makes us the biggest employer in Australia. It also makes us a really exciting place to work, and it makes us a really diverse place to work. So we have more than half of our workforce is women, 63.3% in fact, but less than half of our senior leaders are women. So at the moment that number has actually, I'm pleased to say, just gone up to 34%. 3% are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. 2.9% of our workforce has a disability, and 13.3% are from ethnic, ethno-religious minority groups. So whilst we are large and whilst we are diverse, what we really aspire to is to reflect the community that we serve. And we don't currently have that level of diversity in our workforce. So while we're doing well in some areas, we still have a long way to go. And you know, we aspire to be more inclusive, and we have plans in place to work towards that. And that's what I want to share with you tonight, some of the things that we're actually doing to deliver on that. So I guess the other thing that I just wanted to mention around that was around the types of jobs that we also have in the sector. So I was at a presentation recently where our Commissioner from the Public Service Commission spoke, and he put it really simply, and so I just like to plagiarise him whenever I get the opportunity now. And what he said was that pretty much any job you can imagine, someone is doing it in the New South Wales public sector. And that means there's a huge opportunity for great and varied and long careers across the sector. We have 10 clusters and over 100 agencies within that cluster structure. So there's a huge opportunity. Back to diversity. Let's take a bit more of a look at how we're doing in gender, for example. So gender's a bit of an interesting one in the sector because we employ more than half our workforce as women, and we're actually doing well in leadership when you start comparing it to the private sector. So while we hear a lot of information about the work that the private sector is doing in the gender space, and we're quite quiet in the public sector about the work that we're doing, we actually find when we do the benchmark comparisons that we are performing with a lot of organisations that are considered top performers in the gender space. But we still face many of the same challenges. So, for example, we employ a lot of women in traditional genderised roles in teaching and nursing as examples. They are heavily dominated by women. And the opposite is of course the case for non-traditional roles. So we do not have many women currently working in clusters like transport and justice. So while we overall have a good representation of women, we still need to do work around traditional versus non-traditional roles and helping more women get into leadership roles. I mean, we're certainly not going to be satisfied with that 34%. Our Premier has set us a priority that, by 2025, that number needs to be 50%. And we are actively working now with each cluster to identify what suitable targets might look like on a cluster and agency basis. So a lot of work going on around that to support the Premier's priority. So the other side of the Premier's priority is also about improving the number of Aboriginal people we have in leadership roles. So we need to again double the number of Aboriginal people, and at this stage that number is 63 Aboriginal people, thank you, we have in senior leadership roles, and we are working hard by 2025 to get that number to 114. So they are the two sector targets that the Premier has set. But in addition to that, we also have an advisory committee that has been set up to really help us drive an inclusive workplace for people with disabilities. And we are really focusing a lot of energy and activity around creating a workplace that is more inclusive. And a big part of that, of course, is the recruitment process and how we bring people into the sector. So I certainly hope that you notice many aspects around the idea of inclusion and many things we're doing tonight to emphasise the direction we're taking around creating a more inclusive culture. Recognising that we're not perfect, we're not there yet, but the sector is working very, very hard to make progress in this area. So, what exactly are we doing? Now here you ask. We've got 3 key areas of focus. The first one is focusing on creating an inclusive culture and doing this through providing the enabler around flexible work. Now, flexible work is one of those things that is not just an enabler for one type of diversity group, it is an enabler for everyone. For every single individual in a workplace, flexible work is an enabler in some shape or form for giving them more choice about how they live their lives and how they balance their life at work and their life outside of work. Unconscious bias and disability awareness. So, you know, there's a lot of research around the barriers that unconscious bias places through a whole range of processes within an organisation. And the part of the big challenge around this is that it is, of course, unconscious. So we're not aware of it. But we can do things to reduce those barriers and raise the awareness. And we are putting in place programs to do that. Leadership, of course, leaders create a culture and leaders drive change. So we are working very actively with our core group of leaders around driving an inclusive workplace, and we are putting in place things like programs around inclusive leadership and what that means, values and how to work with values and what that means, bias, what that means, and how to make sound decisions around your workforce. So lots of things going on in the area of leadership. Our organisational systems are really important in terms of creating the scaffolding for how we manage our people. So our work in this area is primarily focused around data and metrics and understanding our workforce. So those of you that currently work in the public sector, you may have noticed, hopefully when you completed your engagement survey, the PMES, that there were quite a few questions in there around things like care responsibilities, flexible work, career development, the types of information that we need to collect to understand if what we're doing is making a difference. Really important. And of course, a key area that we need to focus on is the recruitment, because we want to bring more diverse people into the sector. Once we bring them in, of course, we want to keep them and retain them, and we're doing a lot of work around that. But recruitment is a critical HR activity for bringing diverse groups of people into the sector. Agency-specific plans. So the agencies are also working really hard at the moment on their disability inclusion action plans and putting in place key steps to create more inclusive cultures for people with disabilities. We have a number of other action plans around women and Aboriginals, and we have an Aboriginal strategy as well to drive retention, attraction and development for our Aboriginal people. So one example of this that I wanted to share with you tonight, because you'll be hearing more from Equal a bit later, is we've partnered with Equal, which is a disability consulting organisation, and they are providing us with advice around how to adjust and reshape our recruitment practices to ensure that we are removing bias wherever possible and creating practices that are more inclusive. And we have up here some other activities that we are embarking on to improve access to employment opportunities. So mentoring partnerships, employment pathways, where we've got disability employment networks that exist in the sector, actively providing workplace adjustments, improving the accessibility of our websites, and doing a lot of work with our senior leaders to improve disability awareness. So before I jump down and hand over to Jane, I just wanted to show you a video that we made following an event we had with our executives earlier in the year. It was held in February, and it focused on one of our key priorities, or the Premier's key priorities, which is around driving public sector diversity. So how do I make it play? We don't need that to play.
When you're thinking about workforce diversity, you should be thinking about it in terms of one of the elements we focus on to build really strong public service agencies that attract really talented people, that develop those people and keep those people in the sector over time.
Diverse workforces are more capable. So we in the Army changed our language completely. We stopped talking about altruism. We started to talk about why more women, more men and women from different racial heritage or sexual orientation actually added capability to the Army, bringing true diversity of thought.
The world of work was, created in the industrial era by a particular type of group. Our society has moved and changed and broadened, but our workplace practices haven't kept up.
And the value of having this diverse group of people coming into your workplace. And you can do your job better as a public servant. You can carry out government policy better because you're listening to people about how things should be delivered and how things should be developed.
Basically, the concept of diversity is that we have all these varying different components that construct us as an individual. We have our diversity dimensions, be it our gender, our age, our cultural background, our socioeconomic status. None of those things work in isolation. They all operate together to inform our identity and how we view the world. You change any of those factors and you will alter the lens through which an individual views the world.
We have not given millions of men and women who had not fitted the stereotype the chance to reach their potential, and as a result, we, as the Australian community, as the Australian nation, will not reach our potential if we continue to do that. That's why I'm passionate about diversity.
And I often get asked this, you're obviously not a full-blood Aboriginal, why do you identify as an Aboriginal person? And I say this, those times I wasn't served in shops as a young fella, the times I got knocked back for not renting a house, it wasn't because I was English, it was because I was Aboriginal.
I know you all wake up every day and think about the programs you're running and what the minister's up to, but if you're not spending a big chunk of your day thinking about how to work with your people to make sure that they're engaged, feel that they're able to contribute, then you've got your priority list slightly skewed.
Individuals who are good and inclusive leaders are identity aware. So that means that they're self-aware. They're self-aware of not just their own background and their own cultural traditions, but they're aware of how that plays out.
It is the only way that leaders drive change, to absolutely identify with the issue. Leaders need to then find the language for their workforce. Find the language for your workforce. Stress capability. Don't make women the issue. Make your total performance the focus.
Okay, thank you. I will now hand over to Jane.